I'll be making a simple Python file that will open up this notepad, which is stored in the same folder as my actual file, run each month. It will open up this notepad, read the value, and then ask, is this month 07, is that the same as the current month? And if they are different, that means I'm in a new month, and then my code should run. This is a method to make sure that your code runs once per month, and using what I explained in the last video, you can put this in the startup folder on your computer, so your code runs each time you turn on your computer, but it actually only does something if it's a new month. This is smart if you have a work task that needs to be done at the start of the month, and that way you don't actually have to do anything except write the code the first time, and then your computer will handle the rest, which I think is pretty nice. To begin with, I actually don't want this to be 07 because that would be the current month. I'll make this June. To begin, I'll import datetime to get access to the current date, and I'll make a today date variable because maybe you'd want to add a date stamp somewhere, maybe in another file, or you need this for the task you're doing. And then I can make a new variable called today month, which simply grabs today's date from my variable and gives me just the month portion. And then just to show it, I can do today month and then run it. Here I get just 7, but actually I want 07 because that matches my the string I read from my notepad. So I'll wrap this in string conversion. So I've had a bit of difficulty making sure that I actually get the leading 0 when I extract my string here, because I want that since I'm reading that from my notepad. And a simple way to get around that would be to use a slicer, list slicer, since this is a string. So I'm first taking the today's date and converting that into a string, which is then just the current date. Then I'm taking just the 5th and 6th position, index position of my string, which will always be month because I have the 4-digit year, a dash, 2-digit month, and then a dash. So that will always be position 5 and 6, and this will give me the leading 0, which is exactly what I need. So it was a bit of a workaround, but this works, even though it's a little ugly. At that point, I simply need to open up my notepad, where I already have the name, notepad with date, and I also need the file extension. So I can say with open, and my file is this, but I need to wrap that in quotes. And I need to open it in both read and write mode because I want to read the value, but I also want to replace it with something else. And that something else should be today's date. And then we'll just call it date checker. And then I want to read the value, which is then my last update date. So let's call it last update date, which is a date checker.readLine. And because I only have one line, and I'm sure I'll only have one line because I only use the notepad for one thing, I can just do this to read always the first line. And then I want to grab the date, just the month portion. So I can simply update this to be equal to the original value. And then again, just index position 5 and 6. Here again, I can ask if the two are equal to one another. Is last update date identical to today's month? Because if they are, well, then I want it to close again. And if they are the same, then I've already updated it, which means the code should terminate, which is exactly what it does. If they aren't the same, I can then go back into my notepad because it's already open, it hasn't been closed yet. And here I want to go to the start and delete everything and replace that with today's date, which I can do by saying datechecker.seek 0 to go to the start. And what it does is it simply moves the cursor to the start of the first line, which I need in order to make sure I delete the whole line. And then to actually do the deletion, I'll say truncate and not pass in what the file size should be, because this will simply delete everything. And now I simply need to write to the date checker my actual date, which would be datechecker.write and it needs to write the string version of today's date. Since I have it open, it says it was opened in June. So if I close this and then save this and then run it, I of course get an error because that's how programming works. So it would help if I actually said I want to iterate over text and not over a file, because it doesn't really understand what I'm trying to do here, but I need to change this to be last update date. I'm now saying, hey, you already read the last update date, which I know is just a date. And then I want you to turn this variable into only position 5 and 6. And then we can run it. It finished, and if I open up Notepad with date, it is now the current date, which means that if we run it again, it will just exit. So here I can just add print exited. So when we run it, it will say it exited, which you probably don't want to have that have any indication, because you just want the file to close. And of course, you can now break out of this open file because it's now closed, and then you can write your actual code. And this is a simple way with just one import sentence to have a code that will automatically run each time you turn on the computer. And then if the last update date is in the current month, then the program will simply close, and if not, it will update this notepad with today's date, and then you can have whatever it is you need to do, whether that's opening files or folders or web pages. But of course, we now also need to add this run each month to the start folder, which again, hold down Windows R to open up the run prompt and write in shell startup with a colon. And from in here, all you have to do is drag the file and create a shortcut, and this will run whenever you open. And then make sure that it actually says to open with Python. Yep.